There was one day when I was out of rehab that I felt like, you know what, this is never going to work out. I should probably just end my life. Fortunately, the right person, an old friend, kind of came alongside of me. He said, "Sean, do you really think that your kids don't need you anymore?" I started a career as an IT consultant, ended up being very successful for over 10 years, data analytics mainly, business intelligence. I was very active, outdoorsman. I kayaked 3 seasons, a mountain biker and a swimmer. November 20th of 2011, I'd come back from a business trip in Pittsburgh and I was reading stories to my kids when suddenly I collapsed to the floor and 911 was called. Rushed me to the Highland Park Hospital where they determined I was in the middle of a stroke and that my right carotid artery shredded and blocked the blood flow to my brain, which ended up paralyzing me completely on the left side. I wasn't able to speak, I wasn't able to move my left side at all. And they came to me and said, "You know what? We want to go in because we're afraid that your brain is swelling and we want to remove your skull to give it some room." They put a digital microphone, under my nose and said, "We're about to do something that we think is necessary to save your life, but it may kill you what we're doing. Are you okay with that?" And then there's a moment after you give the approval where they're prepping the operating room. And I was reflecting on the fact of, I might not make this could be it. Do my kids know that I love them? Does my extended family know it? Do my friends and neighbors, do my coworkers? I really didn't know. And I was thinking that, if this is the end, it's going to be a life of regret. It was very despairing to feel that way and very hopeless, and I was terrified. They made the quick move to remove a large part of my skull here on this side to allow my brain to swell. And the brain doctor who did that said, "I'm so glad we did that, Sean, because your brain popped out like a mushroom. And if we hadn't done that, it would have crowded out the good part of your brain and probably killed it." After the first surgery to open up my skull, they realized that my brain was bleeding, so then they did another surgery so that they could stop the bleeding by cauterizing and using clamps. When they sewed me up after the second surgery, without that part of my skull, my head sort of got lopsided. I looked like Gumby, if you remember him. They eventually put a football helmet on me to protect because I no longer had a skull. So I was out in public with wearing a football helmet. That was kind of an interesting season with my Gumby head underneath. They eventually took me to the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, which is now known as the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, to try and help me to recover, starting from the very basics of learning how to walk, learning how to speak, learning how to eat again. I was also realizing that my very active brain, sort of a data analyst. I have a degree in geology, a degree in theology. I was sort of a very deep thinker, and suddenly I couldn't access parts of my brain that I could access before. I could access the left side of my brain, but when I'd go to the right side of my brain, it was hitting this sort of a busy signal. The thoughts would just stop mid-thought. It was very, very despairing and very disheartening, and taking me back to the sense of uselessness, but also the sense of I cannot overcome this burden. I cannot climb this hill before me. I'm not going to be able to overcome this. That's what I thought. My life is done for now. I'm not going to be able to be the person that I was, and I'm not going to become the person that I wanted to be. It was very difficult for my wife, For your spouse to suddenly becoming your caregiver. It was a profound shift for her that I underestimated. She had married one person, suddenly she was given a totally different person. And eventually it sort of wore down her desire to kind of stay in the marriage, sadly. It was a huge loss for me. And for my kids, they were very close to me. As a stay-at-home dad, we did adventures every day. My son once said, they call you a stay-at-home dad, but we never stay at home, Dad. We're always doing something. You're like the always-on adventure dad. And so they've had to adjust. It was hard for them to come to the ICU and see me connected to all these machines. And also when I got out, when I was in a wheelchair. They're also with it is just this huge crisis of faith, if you understand God as being God, then God is in control of things, because that's part of the job description of a God. Then why would God want this to occur or allow this to happen? And it really just sort of sent me on a loop for a while of, that God maybe doesn't think all that well of me. And it really created this huge sense of insecurity, and this huge sense of fear. Just all I could do in that moment was just weep. It took me a long time to sort of understand. I got to the hope that God's intention here was sort of create a miracle of healing. But then when it didn't happen, I realized, well, maybe I need to be open that God has a different intention for this than a miracle. And so I did a big shift to say, how can this change me for the better? How have I wanted to change as a man? And for me, I wanted to be more of a man of compassion, of love, of joy, of hope. And I think that focusing on that is focusing on the things that God and I can do together, as far as the change to my character, as far as the change to my spiritual life, and as far as the change to how I can impact people, had to come into gear in order for me to gain hope. So there's all sorts of things that you have to relearn. There's all sorts of limitations that you need to overcome. I was very fortunate to find good therapists and to also decide to set goals for myself once I lost those therapists. I went from 10 pounds of lifting to over 100 pounds. So I was documenting those goals, and that was not only giving me purpose and a sense of progress, but also people around me that were cheering me on.
Keep going, Sean, you're doing great.
It's just like those 7th grade dads. So when I came back from day rehab, I was able to walk tentatively, but not very well. And they said, your risk for fall is very high. We don't want you to walk unsupervised. I had caregivers, and they'd follow me with the wheelchair every day, week after week. Then eventually I was able to do a mile. And then I was able to do a mile in 90 minutes.
Setting new records.
And so I was always sort of looking at myself and figuring that, I could do better than this. I could try harder. I could go further. And I slowly went down from 90 minutes to eventually a steady 24 minutes. I would just set goals of 50 good steps. And I was able to mark out 2-mile trails around my house that I was able to complete those circuits, doing 50 steps at a time.
I don't know how you spent this beautiful day, but I spent it trying to learn how to walk again.
There's people who have gone through major tragedies in their life, like Nick Wojcik, who was born with no legs and no arms. And he said something that has really resonated with me. He said, even if you don't get the miracle, you can still be the miracle for other people. And that fear of that I hadn't impacted the lives of my children or my friends or my family or my coworkers enough has sort of taken me into the present and into the future with the attitude of, how can I be present for you? How can I care for you? How can I listen to your life story? How can I understand how you've been hurt in life, and how can I be part of that healing? And so I'm excited about the future now. I'm excited about what I can do for other people. I'm excited about the impact I could have in their lives by these lessons learned.